Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, December 21st, 2022. We are in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 25. Let's start in verse 1. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. So ends the part that Samuel could have written. Obviously, Samuel didn't write about his own death. From here on out, the rest of Samuel has to be written by his disciples, by the group of people that he had assembled around him to help him minister. It is, however, continues the rest of 1 Samuel and all of 2 Samuel to deal with consequences of Samuel's ministry. And there is a coherence to it. This is indeed a traumatic event for Israel at the time. Saul's king, but he's an evil king, and they know that. And he's a fool, but he is successful in the battlefield. And he is doing that part of the work. He's, in one sense, no worse than any of the judges had been, except he now has a government authority behind him. The judges were temporary rulers, and they knew it, and they'd never set up a taxing authority. They didn't have a whole court. They didn't pass judgment. They didn't make new laws, things like that. The priests were the one that made the laws and interpreted them and did the judging and that part of the government, and the Levites helped them in that. And then when Eli's sons turned out to be evil, God destroyed that, and Samuel was the one that was raised up, and he acted as a judge, but he was also a prophet, and he anointed two kings, Saul and then David, and now he's died. Saul is still king, and they have this man that is running the government that is clearly not fit to be running the government. And they have a real problem. And fortunately, Samuel was still well loved, and all of Israel assembled. That doesn't mean every man, woman, child did. That means that somebody was sent from every group. He had representatives from every group in Israel at his funeral, and it took a while for the assembly to happen. They would have buried the body well before the assembly happened, and everybody mourned. His passing marked the end of one era, and they didn't know it, but his coming marked the beginning of another. And they knew they were in a time of transition. They'd never had a anointed king before. They'd had one that tried to become king and declared himself king and had a very short rule because he was more of a fool than Saul was, and died. And they kind of had the impression from that God didn't want him to have a king. And then God's representative is the one that anointed a king. And that means God wanted this man for king, but it leaves them in a dilemma. They have somebody who's not following God, anointed by God to be king. And they have somebody else that, rumor has it, was anointed by Samuel to be king, who's running around in the desert hiding, not acting like a king. And apparently, Saul and David both sent representatives to the funeral. They would have, this was a very large assembly. It was probably the largest assembly that Samuel had since he assembled everybody to anoint a king for them. And you know, spiritually it marks a transition. They had been following priest up till Eli and his son's death. They had been following Samuel ever since. Now they have no one to follow to worship Yahweh. Locally, there's going to be some priests that are leading worship wherever they are. But apparently, the tabernacle has been abandoned, and we'll get into it later. David does bring the remnants of the tabernacle back to Jerusalem at a later point in time. And so there was some priests there, and they were doing the best they could with what they had, but they didn't have the authority of a high priest. Ahimelech family, up until Saul killed them, apparently was the leading family of priests, at least in Judah. We have no records of anybody else having worship in their priestly town. Saul called them in and killed them all, except for the one that escaped to be with David. Let's see, Abithiar. And Abithiar is with David. He is leading and acting as a priest with David, but he's not leading the country. There are other priestly towns, and it's supposed that in those priestly towns, they are leading the people to worship Yahweh. But none of them have the national authority that Shiloh did. None of them have the national authority that a leading priest would have gotten. It's local worship. We know in the period of the Judges, some of the Levites, even though they weren't supposed to act like a priest, would go to a community and act like a priest. And to the common man, a Levite was a better representative of God than a common man, and that's true. They were supposed to help the priest, and if a priest had sent them out to do that job, it might have been a interpretation of the Mosaic Code that they could do it. But if they just took it on themselves, it's actually a direct violation of the priestly code in the Mosaic Code. The Levites weren't supposed to. They were supposed to be helpers. And they were supposed to do things like repair the tabernacle and repair the service pieces, such as the shovels of the altar and things like that, if they needed repair. So, and they were to provide bulls and sheep and things like that. There is no centralized authority of that, since there's no high priest. And who knows what's going on. Samuel doesn't record it, and he's beginning to, at this point, he's recording the political, not the spiritual, because they did conflate them. There is no organized worship of Yahweh. They were supposed to, and they're supposed to obey the law, and they're supposed to learn it and teach it, but there's no evidence that they had any organized system to do so. And if your parents taught it to you, you might know it. And if you then taught it to your children, they would know it. But if somewhere along the line your parents or your grandparents failed to teach it, you don't know it. You might know that you're supposed to, but you're not supposed. You wouldn't know what you're supposed to do except by what social custom. And to a large extent, they have compromised with the peoples around them, compromised with the religions around them, and have been doing so since the very beginning. So the common man probably doesn't know what Moses said, doesn't know how to do it, and the priests have apparently become slowly more and more corrupt. And to this point, the common man doesn't know. There are probably camps of priests that have studied the Mosaic Law. They're literate and they can read it, and they're interpreting it and trying to live by it. And there's some that are just using it as a source of income without trying to obey it. And the country is actually becoming a country under Saul. And there's beginning to be a unity, and it's not 12 tribes and a priestly tribe, all in confederation, and everybody can do their own thing. But it's beginning to be a national government with the tribes being, so to speak, the major authority centers that support the monarchy. And Saul is a decently good politician as far as that goes. I'm not going to say he's a bad politician, but like a lot of politicians, if you know there's a biblical thing and you know there's a politically expedient thing, he's going to do the politically expedient thing. And he's not going to be sitting here calling on the priest and trying to parse what's right and wrong. He's going to do what he thinks should be done politically. And it's only the general morality of the people that keep him way in line in any shape, form, or fashion. As you can tell by him chasing David, who's loyal to him, but he's jealous of around the desert. The second half of verse 1. Then David moved down to the desert of Maon. So David has been in, that we found at the end of chapter 24, he's up in the stronghold. He's in a fortification that he's built out in the desert. And he is in that fortification because he doesn't trust Saul. Saul gave him his word, but Saul is clearly wishy-washy. And a lot of people think he was bipolar at this point in time, that he would switch between modes, and he was in one mode when he made David the promise he wouldn't chase him again, and in a different mode he would be out there chasing David again. David is wise enough to see that, whether it's really bipolar or something else, it really doesn't matter. He is not to be trusted. His word is not to be trusted. Even though he said that word in front of a bunch of other people, and they might help keep him in line, ultimately, though, his will is going to go over. And if he decides to go chase David down again, and so David goes up to the stronghold, and better defensive position, harder to do, more costly, and maybe it'll deter Saul some. And then after going to Ramah to mourn Samuel, David then, instead of going back to the stronghold where Saul's men could follow him and figure it out, he goes out to the wilderness of Maon. Maon is in the southern part of Israel and Judah. It's on the border, so to speak. It's an undeclared border. It's part of the land that nobody wants. Nobody cares about. It is not economically fit for anything other than sheep and goats. It's not fertile enough to have cattle or horses or camels. Well, you could do camels there, but camels were not common in Palestine. You had to be fairly wealthy to keep them up. They preferred deeper desert where they had fewer predators. Moan was off the beaten path. It was hard to get provisions there. The people that lived there were shepherds, and they were they followed the sheep. They lived in tents and they followed the sheep, and they just their family group followed their sheep around, and the shepherds led the sheep, and the rest of the camp followed the sheep. So indirectly followed the shepherds. And so you don't have big groups living out there. David has a fairly big group. He's going to kind of stand out there. But on the other hand, it's also a countryside that's going to be hard to follow him in. It is dangerous countryside. It is wild. Those who want to do evil, who want to be bandits and that kind of thing, are going to live out there and sneak in and make raids. It's not a good place for invading armies to come through, so you didn't have to defend it. So nobody put a standing army out there. On the other hand, a little raiding group could sneak through, particularly if they didn't tip off the locals on the way through, if they avoided the shepherds and their small encampments and didn't try to steal sheep, at least until they came back. They could sneak through, make a raid, and then very often run back down the main road to go back home. Uh, that was something that happened, but it didn't affect the people that lived out in Moab. David being out there, though, he's been a shepherd. He understands the dangers of being a shepherd. And he takes on this task of protecting that countryside, protecting the shepherds and their families. Uh, and the implication is he protected from raiding parties, yes, and he protected from thieves and robbers and highwaymen and that kind of thing, yes. But he also stopped the raiding parties that would try to sneak through, and he apparently had his men out hunting wolves and lions and bears, so to speak, the wildlife that would take on sheep. And this was teaching the men battle skills, hunting skills, and allowing the countryside to be safer and the shepherds to do their job with less danger. And he's taken on that role because he finds it useful. He has been a shepherd. He knows what it would be useful for, and he's just kind of protecting everybody in general. Verse 2. A certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing at Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent, beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in his dealings. Um, so, little notes here. Hebrews believed in the meaning of names. We don't have that meaning, that belief in Western society. People can look up the meaning of the names, but it's not something that people obsess over. And if they do, they kind of think, oh, that's interesting, and go on. In Hebrew, though, the names were literally words with meaning. In this case, Nabal means fool. It literally means he's a fool. Now, I don't know what kind of parents would name their son he is a fool. Um, I hope they didn't know something about his character, but his name became a self-fulfilling prophecy in one sense. And the Hebrew idea behind names, though, is you would try to name the child something you wanted them to be and then expected them to become that. So again, I don't know what kind of parent names somebody fool and then expects them to become one. I have a real question about his parents. He is mean and surly. He is foolish in many of his ways, and he does not deal with people well. On the other hand, he apparently is a good shepherd, and he has managed to acquire rather large flocks. In that day and time, typical shepherd might have a few dozen sheep. 100, you were fairly wealthy. He's not just fairly wealthy, 3,000 sheep. He's extremely wealthy by that standards of that day, particularly for somebody who spent all his time out in the desert. And 1,000 goats. That's that's extremely wealthy. And you don't run, 4,000 animals in one group. These are multiple groups. He has multiple shepherds under him keeping sheep. And he has this large operation. And in the economy at the time, the main thing you got from sheep was wool. And once a year, you sheared the sheep in the spring when it started to warm up. You sheared them off, you sold the wool, you kept some for yourself, and you would clean it and cord it and um, make cloth out of it and sell the cloth, sell the thread. But selling the wool was your main profit. Yes, if some female sheep got too old, you might butcher it and eat it, sell the meat, sell the other products that you get from it. You might milk some and get some ewe milk or make some cheese, uh, some of that. Goats, they would milk more, but again, wool was the main thing. Um, the males, they kept thinned out more and they ate them because you didn't need that many uh, rams, that many billies in the flock. You didn't need a 1-to-1 ratio. And so they were the ones you ate largely. But there was also enough attrition from wild animals and just uh, them stumbling into ravines and things like that, that you tried not to thin the herd any more than you had to. And in hard times, you might thin harder and thin out more of the old ones and more males and keep the strongest ones so that the herd could eat what was there and survive better. But you could only eat so much meat at once. And you could save skins and make leather and make pelts and make, you know, things, but fleeces. You there's only so much that you could do, and if you're a mobile society, you don't want to carry around, 1,000 sheep pelts or anything. You know, it's not that useful to you. You can sell them. There's a market for it, and essentially everything that they got from sheep and goats was something they could use in some form. But the profit was in the wool. And so he's at sheep shearing time. He's going to have 4,000 animals worth of wool. You don't shear 4,000 sheep in a day. It's with the number of people they had to keep the sheep and stuff, they could probably do it in well under a week, 3 or 4 days. But there would be a bunch of people shearing sheep. There would be a bunch of people gathering the wool and doing the preliminary processing, the washing, the uh, combing it out to make sure there was no things tangled in it and stuff. And they were going to be busy for a while. And then when they sold it, they would be flush with cash, so to speak. Now, in that day and time, it wasn't a cash economy. Most of the sales were probably somebody that had plenty of wheat would come out and go, I need, so many pounds of wool, and I'm willing to sell so many bushels of wheat to you for so much wool. And, it was a barter economy. And so they would get the things they needed that way. And they probably had people that they traded with routinely. It was built on a relationship system. And people in the clan, people in related clans, people that had intermarried with your clan. That's the kind of thing that business relationships were built on. And so Neville had somewhere to sell wool, and he would have bought the goods, it's a year's worth of goods it's going to take to feed his people, and bought them from places where, you know, say dates were grown, and he'd buy dried dates, or figs, and he'd buy dried figs, or he'd buy wine, he'd buy, you know, and he'd make the trade off. And a lot of his wool would be sold fairly quickly, and he'd be flushing goods and flushing. And that's also the time they determined, is this ewe going to be too old to bear young this next year? If they determined that, she'd be slaughtered and there would be meat for sale. That would be also be the time they would determine which of these rams are going to be the strongest. And okay, we only need X many rams. The rest of the rams will sell or will slaughter. And so then they would have, this is the time. And some, if they didn't have a sale for the animal, they didn't necessarily slaughter it immediately. It was cheaper to let it continue to eat, and the market price might come up next week, next month, when everybody's finished shearing and trying to sell. And so they might keep a lot of them, but they'd make that decision now. And if they had a debt to pay, that was the time sent somebody over with, if owed 10 sheep, 10 of the young rams that you weren't going to keep, and see if you could pay your debt, kind of thing. And so it's like the harvest season for shepherds. The harvest is in, and the celebration happens after you finish the work. Even though you haven't sold all the wool, you haven't sold all the meat, you haven't sold all the spare animals, you know how profitable you're going to be. You might still have a lot to sell and a lot to do, but you know how well you did this year. And so it's a time of celebration. While David was in the desert, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep, so he sent 10 young men and said to them, Go up to Nabal in Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable toward my young men, since we have come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. So, and apparently David is routinely doing this to all the shepherds in the area. And it was fairly common for, at this festival time, if somebody came up and asked for something, and you'd been profitable this year, you share some of your profit with them. And particularly if somebody had been protecting your people, your sheep. And David knew he had been protecting sheep. Nabal's sheep were probably not the only thing he was protecting. He was probably protecting the whole countryside, protecting everybody in it. But Nabal is the only one we have an account of. because of what happens next, it becomes important to David's story. If he'd gone to an encampment where the shepherd had, say, 100 sheep and he'd shared sheep, and, David probably would have sent one man to him and they'd shed, and he'd said, sure, here's two sheep cheeses and, um, you know, a pelt, and here's a little bit of meat, say a four-quarter. And, that would have been a fair amount for somebody celebrating that small flock to give to somebody else in celebration. And David would have been happy with it. And, that kind of thing was going on. And David had good relations with, apparently, with everybody throughout the Moab desert. And at sheep shearing time, he would have been sending people to get supplies, try to resupply everybody while he's out there. And people would have been giving him stuff. Nabal, well, he's his name. He's foolish. And we read there in verse 3 that he was surly and mean in his dealings. He was not the person that you wanted to have to deal with, but he had acquired wealth because he was crafty and probably fairly mean in his business dealings. And he ended up, acquiring profit and acquiring things. And once he got to a certain size, he becomes the big shepherd, and everybody else has to make way for him. Verse 9, when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, who is this David, who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I've slaughtered for my shearers and give it to the men coming from who knows where? So he gives this harsh answer to the men. They have come in peace. They've come asking, and they've not demanded a certain thing. They've just said, whatever you have at hand. Nabal could have very easily said, oh, fine, sure, give them some wool. I've got plenty. Oh, give them yesterday's day old bread. I don't want to eat it anyway. And said, that's my gift. And sent them off. He would have been harsh with that. He would have not been fulfilling social customs and social norms, but everybody would go, oh, he's surly and mean, and, he did something. Be grateful. And the 10 men would have probably taken it and gone, it's not probably what David had in mind, but, we got something. Instead, he gives this very demeaning answer. He knows that David's running from Saul, and he's interpreting that David's trying to break away from Saul and become king. He may have heard that David had been anointed by Samuel, and, he's throwing it in David's face that hey, you're not part of the kingship. You're not legitimate. And, why should I give anything? I pay my taxes to Saul, basically is what he's saying. He's probably not real happy with Saul, and he probably, when Saul's tax collectors come out, he's tried to figure out when they're coming, and he's sent as many sheep off where nobody can find them as possible, and he's probably, when the tax authorities get there, he goes, no, I don't have 3,000 sheep. It was a bad year. I've got 1,000 sheep. See, and this is what I got. And, here's all the wool I got. And, he's probably cheating on his taxes. and being that kind of individual. And he's not going to share with David. And he gives this very harsh answer. And the scripture says, a harsh answer stirs up wrath, and a gentle answer turns away wrath. He's stirring up wrath. And he's so mean and surly, and he's so used to being able to just bluff his way through and be meaner than the other shepherds. And let's face it, out in the desert, that's probably an effective tactic, particularly when you're dealing with wild animals and possibly other shepherds, to get bigger. But probably for the first time in his life, he's dealing with a real military. He's probably dealt with raiding parties, and that may be effective with raiding parties. If you make the cost of stealing his stuff higher than the stuff will be worth, then, they're going to leave you alone. And apparently, just being mean and surly out in the desert is enough to give him an edge and make him able to be wealthier. And now he has given this answer to David. Not directly, but indirectly. Verse 12, David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. And note here, they have memorized a fairly long speech to go give to Nabal. They've given it to Nabal. They memorize what he said and bring it back. It's a very oral culture. People learn things by quoting them. They're not reading a text and learning it the way we do. They're not going to carry around books and read them, and they're going to memorize. And so the people that know Scripture have memorized it. This is a good example of how fast they memorize stuff. If you're used to doing it all the time, like we're used to reading, they heard this speech once and then remembered it, and they probably rehearsed it on the way back because there was 10 of them, make sure they got it word for word and they didn't miss anything, and they got the inflections right and all that, so they could report it back to David. And they come back and they repeat it exactly to David, having heard it once in an original source. And they tell it to him. Verse 13, David said to his men, put on your swords. So they put on their swords, and David put on his. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. And he's making a war party. 400 armed warriors are probably more than a match for Nabal and his shepherds. Yeah, shepherds, I wouldn't want to mess with a shepherd, let's face it. They're going to be used to fighting off wolves and bears and lions. And as David says, I've killed the bear and the lion with my bare hands. And they're, I wouldn't mess with a shepherd that's defending a sheep. And a shepherd and his stave, a shepherd and their slings and their rocks, formidable foe. I would not want to have to go to battle with them. On the other hand, David and his men are experienced warriors, and they're going up against undisciplined civilians. And if they do this right, they will have a lot less losses if they decide to attack. And these harsh words that Nabal has said, I stirred up an anger in David and his men, and they are angry. They were expecting supplies that would last them a while, and they're not going to get them. And David also divides his forces. 200 men are going to stay with the supplies. They have stuff. They have stuff that needs to be defended. They have apparently servants and families and women and children with them. That would be typical of an army, and they got to protect that stuff. And he's hoping to, by the end of shearing season, have enough stuff to last a year. So they don't have a trivial amount of stuff. And he's leaving a third of his men to defend the stuff, while two-thirds of the men are going to go on attack. And he's clearly in attack mode. Now, in attack mode, the servants, the families, the children, everything else they have would have been left with the supplies. And the 200 men left with the supplies, he doesn't leave incompetence behind. There's no implication that David thought less of the men he left to protect. In fact, he may have thought more of them, and they can operate independently without me. They don't have to have me organizing them. They know their job and they will do it. He has with him an attack force. Verse 14, one of the servants told Nabal's wife Abigail, David sent messengers from the desert to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day, they were a wall around us all the time. We were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. Now, this servant is reporting to Abigail, and apparently they've been trying to talk to Nabal and tell him, hey, give David something. He has protected us. He's done the job. It's been easy for us to be out in the desert. We lost nothing. We didn't even lose sheep. He not only didn't not mistreat us, just ignore us. That would have been one thing if they just kind of existed in the same spot but didn't use the same resources and didn't interact with each other. It's obvious they interacted, but they actively protected, and they didn't suffer losses. And the shepherds knew that David and his men were doing things like taking on wild animals and taking on robbers and thieves and highwaymen and raiding parties and actively protecting the countryside. And that David and his men were acting like a king battle group protecting the border should act. So they know he's acting like he's still loyal to Saul and loyal to the country and doing border patrol out in this wilderness. And they know he is worthy of something. Even if he doesn't have taxing authority and he's not being supported by the central government, he's worthy of, giving some serious gifts to. And so they're reporting this to the matriarch of the clan. The patriarch gave a bad answer, and they've tried to talk to him, and he doesn't come to his senses and send a gift behind them. And so they go to the matriarch and say, we're in trouble. This guy is serious. Think it over and see what you can do. That's what they tell her. They plead with her. Hey, help. He gave an answer. We're going to be in trouble. We're going to be dead. We don't want this. Help us out. Verse 18. Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, go ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. Okay, now, she took some serious provisions. 200 loaves of bread. We as modern people would think, 200 pounds of bread, maybe 400 pounds of bread. No, 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 no. These were probably 25-pound loaf bread. So 200 loaves. She's taking 2.5 tons of already cooked bread. That's no trivial, a little bit of bread. She's planning to feed some people. Let's face it, 600 men with David, plus the servants and stuff. It'll feed them a while. Probably about as long as the bread will last, actually. She's probably bringing enough that they're going to have to find something to do with it before it goes bad. Um, 2 skins of wine. Where they were in the desert, she had to buy that wine. And 2 skins of wine, that's basically the volume of 2 sheep of wine. It's a fair amount of wine, but among 600 men, it's not much. But it is a significant amount of wine. It was expensive where they were. 5 dressed sheep. So they butchered out 5 sheep. That's a significant amount of meat. 600 men and all the people that were with them, uh, that's enough for everybody to have a meal, maybe a little bit of leftovers, but it's not like a lot of provisions like the bread was. But they could feast. Everybody could feast and enjoy it. And, you know, they wouldn't waste it. They would, use every part of the sheep. And after the stuff was roasted, probably all the bones would get boiled into soup and the bones cracked and the marrow taken out. And, they would use everything and they would make good use of it. So it's a fine gift. 5 seahs of roasted grain. That's probably about a bushel of roasted grain. It's not enough to feed 600 men. On the other hand, it's enough that the sentries that are in that Sabbath group could have traveling food with them for a week or two. And again, this is not grain growing country, so it's stuff she bought, and she bought it as roasted grain. It was bought, and it would keep for a while, but she bought it so that the shepherds could take stuff out as they went out with sheep and have a portable meal. It's, a bushel of roasted grain is a significant gift, and the sentries, those who had to stay outside the camp for whatever reason, would have a portable meal with them, and that was what that was. 100 cakes of raisins, 200 cakes of pressed figs. Again, dried fruit, that was not fruit producing country. She had to buy that at this time, and it was provisions. It was what they had that was sweet, that was stable, and would last a while. We don't know how big the cakes were, but archaeological evidence, they find between 1 pound and 5 pound loaves of dried fruit in fruit presses where they would press the cakes together for more convenient storage and last better. And it's easier to carry and keep up with and loose. And even if it's 300 pounds of dried fruit she sent, that's enough dried fruit for 600 men for a while, particularly if they ate it as they traveled, went somewhere. And that was very often a traveling food. Notice she didn't send any cheese. They had milked, probably, but the cheese was not fully ripe yet, prepared. It wasn't yet available. And any cheese she would have had would have been left over from last year. Now, it would still been there, it's still been good, but she didn't have it to spare. She she gave out of her abundance, and she gave good things that would provide nutrition for people. She didn't try to provide things that she had in abundance. She didn't say, "Oh, let's send them, a ton of wool." A ton of wool would have been an expensive gift, but what do soldiers need with wool? They're not going to spin thread and weave cloth and make garments out of it. They're going to have to sell it and sell it for something else. So she doesn't send what she has in abundance. She sends out of the things she bought with the things she had in abundance. So she's a very wise woman. She knows what they need, and she sends it in proportion to what she has, and she sends a goodly amount. If Nabal had sent a tenth of that the first time, David would have gone, okay, that's what he gave us, and gone on probably. He wouldn't have gotten angry, even if Nabal had been somewhat harsh with his gift giving. He would have taken it and been gracious and gone on. But she's being generous with it and trying to head off anger because she knows that David would be righteous to be angry after this speech. And the last point, she didn't tell her husband. She just did it. She has the initiative to go head things off. Let's face it, women who some raiding party attacks the camp suffer too. They don't get just ignored and left alone. The men she cares about, the sons she cares about, the people that are around her that she cares about are going to suffer if David comes and attacks. And so she's trying to save her people. It's not just her husband. She knows that one man is not he may be the only guilty person, but he's not the only one that's going to suffer if something happens. And she doesn't tell him because she doesn't want his opinion about what she's doing. She's doing the right thing, but she knows he's going to be angry about it. And she'll deal with that later. Right now, we're trying to appease warriors. Verse 20, as she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there was David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, it has been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. So David is very angry, and he's just made this internal promise to go kill every male in the clan. All the shepherds, all Nabal, all of his sons, all of his brothers, cousins, any older men that are there. He's going to kill every male. He's not out to kill the women per se. By the culture of that time, though, when you do that, you basically capture the women and they become your servants, your slaves, or you sell them, or you let their clans redeem them. But he's going to do a raiding party like he was going to do it against Israel's enemies. And that's just the decision that he's just told the men when she shows up. So the men know what they're doing. And apparently they've done this before. Apparently King Saul and or David has sent them out on that kind of mission before. And they are successful at it, and they know their mission. They know how to organize and do this, and they know how to fall on unsuspecting people and kill men and boys and capture booty and women and come back to camp. And the men are probably quite willing to. Verse 23. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, My lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. May my lord pay no attention to the wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name is Fool, and folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. Now, since the Lord has kept you, my master, from the bloodshed, and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal, and let this gift which your servant has brought to my master be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. And when the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant. She is a very wise woman. She comes and she's very humble. In fact, she's not just humble. She bows down like she was bowing down to a king or a priest. And she says this with her face in the dirt. And she's pleading with him. One, accept this gift. And let's face it, they didn't have to know what was in the donkeys. They could see, let's face it, that's a whole, mule train full of donkeys in one sense. It's a bunch of donkeys. And they can see they're loaded down with provisions. They don't have to know what's in there. Let's face it, if it was all just unroasted grain, it's a big haul. If she's gotten more high value stuff than just the grain, it's a big gift, an expensive gift. It's a worthy gift. It's the kind of thing that if Nabal had given it to start with, would have been a kind of excessive. But once you're trying to head off disaster, you kind of got to be excessive to be effective sometimes. And she knows that. And so she's trying to, even if David is a hothead, and she doesn't know him personally per se, but she does know him by reputation to the servants. If he's a hothead, maybe the size of the gift will help. And, she's being wise. And she's saying this, okay, here's this gift. Please accept it from my hands. I'm sorry. I should have handled it. I'm the person, and you approached Nabal, and he's a fool, and sorry he was a fool. But if I'd seen it, I would have treated your men right, and we would have given them some provisions. Please accept this gift. When I found out, hey, I came your way, and I'm bringing it to you now. And then she pleads with him, not just, here is a gift, here's the payment we should have made to you to start with. She pleads that he be righteous, and she acknowledges that God is going to make him king yet, that he's not there yet, but that he will eventually be king. She's heard that Samuel's anointed him. He's going to be king. She trusts God. And she appeals to David's morality, that you not do harm in Israel, not do harm to your people, not have on your conscience that you have had to avenge yourself for slights when you become king. And that's a very worthy, high praise. She's acknowledging he's eventually going to be king and he's going to be ruling, and saying, hey, don't have on your conscience that you did harm to your own people along the way. Uh, Technically, it would have been illegal. Uh, the kind of countryside it was, he could probably get away with it, and as long as Nabal was not well connected to Saul, which probably he wasn't if he was out there, uh, he was he Saul wouldn't chase him down for it and deal with it. Now, Saul might chase him down just for an excuse. Oh, somebody that I don't care about got killed, but now I have a legitimate thing to say and change people's mind about it. And she's heading that off, that David will be blameless. And she pleads with him to stay innocent, to not commit bloodshed. And she states that David will eventually succeed. I'm sure David at this point is wondering, is he ever going to be king? Is he ever going to succeed? Or is he going to be running around through the desert forever? And even should Saul die, is he still going to have to be out in the desert, because the politics is going to be such that even though Jonathan loves him, Jonathan can't bring him back in. You know, David's out there and times are tough, and times are tough emotionally, and times are hard economically, and all he has is faith. And it doesn't seem like that's working real well. And then he hears this harsh statement, and he's like, buckle up, men, let's go, let's do our business. And she meets him, and she pleads with him, and pleads with him to stay innocent and not commit bloodshed, and to accept this gift. Verse 32. David said to Abigail, praise be the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak. So David acknowledges, yes, I was coming on a raid. I was fixing to kill everybody, every male in the camp. But because you've done that, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to change my mind. You've given a good gift. I'm going to accept it. We're not going to attack. So she has achieved her mission. David, also acknowledges that she's a wise and worthy woman, intelligent and upright, and has kept David from committing bloodshed that he shouldn't commit. And he acknowledges his guilt, that yes, I was planning it, but I'm not going to. You've calmed me down. I'm going to accept your gift. Verse 35, then David accepted from her hand what she'd brought him and said, go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request. Then Abigail went to Nabal. He was in a house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. So she told him nothing until daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So, medical authorities have read this passage and determined that Nabal had a stroke when she told him the next morning when he sobered up. He was having a grand party. He was having grand time because of how much they'd gotten that year, how profitable it had been. And she told him nothing then. Telling a drunk something that might make him mad, probably is not a wise thing. She's a wise woman. She didn't do it. She waited till he's sober the next morning. The implication is he's probably hungover or he's not feeling real good. He partied too hard, and he's sober in the morning. He can think it through, and she tells him what she did and what she prevented, and how David had 400 men coming. And Neville probably could have counted up and gone, yeah, we don't have that many, and we'd have definitely lost against professional soldiers attacking, particularly if they attacked at night when we weren't prepared and weren't thinking it's going to happen. And last night when I was drunk and everybody else was drunk, yeah, they would have succeeded easily. And he realized I did a really foolish thing. And apparently he had a stroke from the stress of that. And he lived about 10 days and then died. It doesn't matter exactly what the medical thing was. The Lord struck him at that moment of stress and clarity, and it took him about 10 days to die, and then he died. So God cast judgment on Nabal, and not the rest of all the innocents in the camp. Verse 39. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Praise be to the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head. Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife. She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, Here is your maidservant, ready to serve you and wash the feet of my master's servants. Abigail quickly got on a donkey and, attended by her 5 maids, went with David's messengers and became his wife. David also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both were his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Galium. So, when David hears that Nabal has died, he praises God because God kept him from committing the sin of killing everybody in the clan, and God exacted judgment on Nabal. And he realizes Abigail is now a widow, and she's a wise woman. He would like that kind of wise woman as a wife, and so he sends a marriage proposal. The thing is, Abigail is now no longer matriarch of the clan. Her husband was patriarch. He's died. She's the widow. If they had children, the oldest son is now probably the patriarch. If they didn't, or if the children are young, probably one of Nabal's brothers is now patriarch, or cousins. And she has lost her standing in the clan. If she was not from that clan but married into it, she now has dropped from being matriarch to being just another woman in the clan. She's a commoner. She's nobody, so to speak. Now, she has 5 maidservants. She's fairly wealthy. But she has no future left with them. And David is obviously up and coming, and if she has the faith that he's going to become king that she said, she's just been offered to become one of the king's wives. It doesn't take her long to decide that's the best deal I'm going to get. I'm not going to get married to Saul or any of his sons, and get in the government that way. There might be another wealthy man out here somewhere that likes how I keep house and would ask me to marry him, but maybe not. I might just be a widow in the clan for the rest of my life. Nabal's ex-wife, with all the implications that has, it still carries the same implication today. And her, you know, her standing would be the standing that Neville leaves her. Well, Neville was a mean and surly man. Everybody's going to be a little upset with him, and they're going to take it out on Abigail, not go, we commiserate with you, and we're glad he's gone. Here, we're going to be kind to you. If there's any residual bad feelings, they're going to go, well, you benefited from his surliness all your life, and now you get your just desserts for supporting you. Well, she's got to, because she's his wife. She has no other options in that society. But people are going to do that, and she knows that. And here David proposes marriage. Sure. And she offers to be the lowest servant to the group, to wash their feet. She was willing to do whatever it took for David and his men. And she comes with her and her 5 maidservants. A woman with 5 maidservants doesn't come empty-handed. She comes with a whole house full, she comes with, so to speak, a wardrobe. She comes with goods. She comes with cooking equipment. She comes with equipment to make clothing and repair clothing and make stuff, whatever they did in the clan. And since they were shepherds, working with wool, making thread, making cloth, probably dyeing cloth, things like that, obviously cooking, things like that, would have been the things that she did. And so she is coming with her 5 maidservants and their supplies and what 6 women could do. And she's coming. She probably thinks to serve 600 men. It's very unlikely that David had 600 men out there with the men doing all the cooking and the cleaning and the keeping up of stuff. They probably have people with them, because even the armies didn't do that at that time. They had their servants with them. But she's also coming with the knowledge of how to organize that kind of thing so David doesn't have to. He probably is somewhat organized and has people, but he doesn't have a wife himself. He's left Michal back in the city with her father. He had to escape with his life. And he's living out there with 600 men, 600 soldiers, I should say. He's increased in number from 300 the first time we heard it to 600 today. So men are continuing to join him. He's learning how to get supplies and keep them supplied and keep them fed. And he's getting a reputation for being a good leader. People are joining him. And the implication by now is it's not just those who are destitute that are joining him, that people are joining him because he is a good leader, and he's turned destitute people that are losers into valuable soldiers. Valuable enough that he can organize a 400-man raiding party with 200 men to guard the goods and have high chance of success. And, Neville's clan, with his death, somebody would succeeded. They would still have the 3,000 sheep and the 1,000 goats, and they would still be wealthy and etc. Stuff would be divided up. The clan would take care of that, but the clan would stay wealthy. And Abigail decides, I'm going to go become an important man's wife. He's not wealthy yet, but she knows how to help him get the material goods and use them correctly, and she knows somewhat of what he's gotten because she gave him some of it. And he also marries this other woman, uh, Hinoam of Jezreel. Uh, and so he has two wives out with him in the desert. He has 600 fighting men and their servants and probably some of their families. Most of them probably left the clan behind. And if they were married and left the wife and children with the clan for the clan to take care of them, they were taken care of. But if they left to go being a fighting man with David, they would not have broken relationships with the clan. The clan would have sent them, hey, go be with David. He's the good guy. And the wife and children would still had social standing, just like the wives and children of soldiers today have a social standing that is higher than just whatever job they happen to have. I know a lot of soldiers' wives end up in fairly low-paying, menial kind of jobs, even today. But when people hear, oh, your husband's in the Army, your husband's in the Navy, your husband's a Marine, your husband's in the Air Force, suddenly you're not just a clerk at Walmart. You're not just the woman behind the counter at the dry cleaners. You're not just a house cleaner. You're a military person's wife, and that gives you a higher standing. That would have been true then too. And so, if they didn't have their families with them because they left them back with the clan, the clan would have been taking care of them because you're a soldier's wife, and the man could be free to do his job as a soldier. And so David is now getting that status of being essentially a general. And he now is viewed as important enough that he can afford two wives. Now, Saul has taken his daughter and married her to somebody else. We'll come back to that husband later. He's going to be an important part of the story later. But this instant with Nabal shows what kind of character man David is. Yes, he's capable of violence from anger, but he's also capable of negotiating peace when it's necessary and when it's the right thing to do. And Abigail presents that situation where, okay, you are righteous to be angry, but let's be more righteous and not commit bloodshed. And he goes, yes, I accept that. I'm not the kind of man that, because I've said it, I have to go kill everybody. I'll accept this gift from your hand, and we'll make a treaty of peace. And he does, and he keeps his word. And then God judges Nabal. And David sees the opportunity to get a wise woman as wife, and he gets her. And he gets another wife. And he starts acquiring wives. You could not be a man that had two wives unless you were either a certain kind of wealthy or a certain kind of powerful. And technically he now has three wives, even though there's not been a formal divorce. Saul has married his daughter off to somebody else. So probably Saul has, by fiat of being king, said, she's no longer married to David. Hand waving, had some scribe write an article of divorce for her. And even though women at that time probably weren't considered able to divorce, Saul divorced them. And I wouldn't be the guy that argued with Saul that you don't have that authority as king. I wouldn't be that kind of guy. And the guy that becomes his son-in-law, yeah, he's trying to curry favor with the king. He's definitely not going to point out, I shouldn't marry her. She's married to David. No, he's going to go, hey, I got a wife. I could end good with king. And so, you know, we have this story developing. David is becoming more powerful out in the desert. He's beginning to uh, not tax people, but get the supplies it takes to keep his group going. And he now acquires a woman who now knows how to run a household and run the domestic side of things so that his group functions better. And let's face it, she's with that many sheep, she's been used to organizing the clothing and the food and the cooking and the mercantile side of things for about that many people as matriarch. She's got a better position in life. Okay, she's out in the desert. Oh, wait, she's been in the desert. She's been running around in the desert following a shepherd in a tent. Now she's following a soldier in a tent. Um, Same kind of thing. Holy Father, have us to be as wise as Abigail, that we will give that soft answer that turns away wrath, and not the harsh answer that Nabal gave. That we won't give harsh answers, that we will be the gentle souls that seek peace and that give wise answers and are peaceable. Lord, help us to be generous like Abigail was, to give good gifts, particularly when we have an abundance of things, and that we will give them to the righteous and encourage a righteous society. Lord, have us to be like David, that when somebody's wronged us and we are offered a peace offering, we will accept it and do the right thing and not continue in harshness and violence. And we will instead be forgiving and gracious. Lord, I ask that you would help us in this Christmas season to remember you and the gracious gift you gave us, the gift of forgiveness, that your only Son would come to dwell among us, to be Emmanuel, to be the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. In your gracious name, amen. I am your host, Frank Reich, Associate Pastor of Family and Ministry at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church. And this has been the Wednesday evening Bible study for December 21st, 2022. And I hope to see you Wednesday when we meet, where we can discuss this. I want you to have a blessed week. This is Monday, December 19th. This is my 41st wedding anniversary, and Frankie and I had a good meal together today. And we have other celebrations going on tonight, lots of family things going on. I hope you have a blessed week. I hope you have a Merry Christmas and good family relationships. I know we've had a very good celebration season that started last week with Leah's birthday, and will continue through at least Sunday. And we will meet Wednesday the 21st. We will meet Wednesday the 28th. Frankie and I will be camping the first Wednesday in January. We're going to be at Bastrop State Park, and I will have a video up for then. I'm also working on several things for the YouTube channel, and hope to be able to announce them fairly soon. You have a blessed week. I hope to see you Wednesday. I hope to see you Sunday. And if not, I'll see you here on YouTube.